Hello, my name is Trent Hawker, and I am the Horticulture Program Coordinator for the Ford Iroquois County Master Gardener Program with University of Illinois Extension Unit 13. And today we are going to talk about prevalent plant problems of 2015. We had a lot of conditions this year that made for some weird growing conditions in the garden, so I'm subtitling this Pathetic Plant Pictures, so that's what we're going to talk about today. So just a little overview on as far as how plant disease works. So it's really interesting. We come up with what we call the plant disease triangle, and then we add a fourth dimension that makes it the plant disease tetrahedron. Don't worry, I'm not expecting you to remember all of these terms, but we're just going to go through this just a little bit. So in order for a plant disease to occur, the first thing is we have to have a susceptible host. That's the biggest thing. You have to have a plant in order to have a plant disease. Following the triangle down and to the left, we have to have a plant disease pathogen present. Without something like fungal spores or bacteria, we're not going to have that disease show up. And then the third thing is a favorable environment. So you have to have wet, rainy conditions, for instance, or some diseases like hot and humid. So it just depends on the specific disease. And then the fourth element, kind of in the middle of the triangle, is time. All of these things happen over time. They usually, generally, don't happen overnight. So I mentioned favorable environment, and a lot of times this year we ended up having something that looked more like this. We had a lot of rain early in the growing season that led to a lot of diseases that we're going to talk about soon. So what I'm going to do is we're going to talk about diseases of fruits and vegetables first, and then we'll talk about diseases of ornamentals. So as far as fruits and vegetables go, I'm really mainly going to focus on tomatoes, which is my favorite, of course, my favorite crop, and some that have some really common diseases that we get a lot of questions about. So the first disease or problem of tomatoes is blossom end rot. And what blossom end rot is these large sunken regions of tomatoes on the blossom end where the flower was attached to the fruit. So usually a large black spot. And what this is caused by is a lack of calcium uptake in the plant. The plant can't absorb enough calcium from the soil. So does that mean that our soils are deficient in calcium? Not necessarily. It's normally caused by water fluctuation. So heavy amounts of water followed by really dry, or really dry followed by a rapid water environment can lead to reduced calcium uptake and cause these blossom end rots. So it's really important to maintain an even soil moisture to prevent blossom end rot of your tomatoes. The next disease, not really a disease caused by bacteria or something like that, but problem with tomatoes are growth cracks. So growth cracks are common on many varieties of tomatoes, especially some of the older, larger heirloom types of tomatoes. The oddly shaped ones can experience a lot of growth cracking. And what that is an uneven growth rate, usually caused by a large uptake of water. The plant absorbs a lot of water very quickly, and it grows too fast, and it just cracks. So you can have things like radial cracking or concentric circles cracked around the fruit. And fortunately, this doesn't affect the edibility of the plant at all. You can still eat those tomatoes. They don't look great, so you might not want to sell them, say, at a farmer's market or something, but they still taste just fine. You can cut out that portion and eat the rest of the tomato. The next disease, this is a specific disease, are tomato leaf spots. There are several different leaf spots, but I'm kind of lumping them all into one. And the first picture here on the left side of the screen is a tomato disease called Septoria leaf spot. It's a very common fungal disease that we see in tomatoes pretty much every year. It's almost guaranteed. So it thrives in wet and humid weather, which we had a lot of during the growing season in 2015. And what happens is it's a fungal disease that's found in the soil. The fungal spores are in the soil, and it usually affects the lower leaves first on the plant. So what it does is when it rains or when you water your tomato plants, fungal spores splash up from the soil onto the plant, and then it just works its way up as you go. These diseases rarely infect the fruit, but it is possible. But mainly you'll see spots on the leaves, just like here in the picture. So this is Septoria again. And this picture here is early blight. It's characterized by the kind of concentric rings on the screen there. Concentric rings in the spots, it looks like a bullseye pattern. So that's common to early blight. And again, not necessarily a disease, but something that can be very common in tomato plantings are the hornworms, tomato hornworm and tobacco hornworm. And a lot of people use this term interchangeably, tomato or tobacco hornworm, but it's actually interesting to note that they're two separate insects. So the tomato hornworm there on the left of the screen has these stripes that are more V-shaped, or sometimes people will call them even T-shaped. And on the right side of the screen is the tobacco hornworm, which has just straight white lines. So an easy way I say to remember that is that tobacco hornworm has straight white lines that look like cigarettes. So tobacco, cigarettes, straight white lines. So that's very common in a lot of tomato plantings. However, if you see a tobacco hornworm in your garden on your plants that looks like this one, you want to leave that alone. Those white attachments on the back of the hornworm are actually parasitic wasps. So the wasp lays her eggs inside the worm, and then they hatch and pupate to form these cocoons and actually end up eating the worm from the inside out. So those cocoons will all hatch into more wasps to attack more hornworms in your garden. So I would go ahead and leave those alone. And finally, to get done talking with tomatoes, we're going to talk about another disease. This picture actually is taken from a sample that came into our office in Onarga of peach leaf curl. So it's blister-like growths on the leaves of peach trees, usually red and leathery and raised off the surface of the leaves. And they favor cool, moist weather. However, it's usually not lethal to your trees, and there's only one cycle of this disease per year. So if you find this disease on your tree, it won't happen again in the same year, and then treatment can occur after that. So if you know this disease is going to be a problem, you can have treatment options. Go ahead and give us a call at our office, and we'd be happy to give you that information. So just some basic garden sanitation practices in general to help lessen the likelihood of disease. So just some basic guidelines. The first is to maintain even soil moisture, like we talked about with blossom end rot, growth cracking, those kinds of things. Just maintaining moisture, not too wet, not too dry, just somewhere right in the middle. And also removing any dead or diseased plants. That decreases the likelihood of spreading disease around your garden. And also increasing the air circulation around those plants. If you can have some breathing room, they're not all crammed together, you can lessen the likelihood of disease, as well as mulching around the base of the plants to help, first of all, maintain that even soil moisture, and second of all, to prevent the splashing up of fungal diseases onto tomatoes specifically. And again, with that, avoid overhead watering, so don't water from the top and just rain water down on the leaves. You want to water at the base of the plant is generally a good practice. And practicing crop rotation. Don't plant your tomatoes in the same spot every year can help lessen the likelihood of disease. And just scouting frequently. Go out and see what's happening in your garden. If you catch a problem early, you have a better likelihood of controlling it. So next, we're done talking with fruits and vegetables, and now just talking about a few diseases we saw this year on ornamental crops, trees and flowers, perennials, annuals, things like that. So the first one I'm mentioning here is tar spot. And so it mainly affects many maple species, and what it is are small yellow sunken spots in mid-June or so here in Illinois. And then into the fall, those spots blacken into dark, raised, kind of leathery patches that look like tar has been just dripped on the leaves. And so what that does is it doesn't really affect the development of the tree at all. Yes, it looks bad, but it's not necessarily something we have to control. The leaves will go ahead and drop in the fall like they always do, and then start fresh in the spring. Another very common disease we get a lot of questions about is anthracnose, especially on sycamore, oak, maple, and even ash trees. And so what anthracnose is, again, it's a fungal disease which causes large necrotic or dead lesions on leaves. And so it looks terrible, the leaves can drop prematurely, but again, usually not a serious concern. The tree will just leaf out again and just continue to grow. It just causes a little bit of leaf drop. In sycamores, however, it's kind of different. You see a lot of times on sycamore trees something called a witch's broom. So it's caused by anthracnose again, but it's a lot of growth of twigs from one point on the tree. So what that does is it causes what's called a witch's broom and just a weak attachment point for a lot of branches. Again, not a serious concern. It's not going to kill the tree, but it's just something to be aware of. Another common plant problem we saw this year was chlorosis. And what chlorosis is, like you can see in the picture, most of the leaf tissue turns this bright lime green or yellowish color, but the veins remain dark green. And so what causes chlorosis is a pH imbalance in the soil. This pH imbalance then in turn causes a nutrient deficiency, sometimes iron, sometimes other things that can't be absorbed by the plant because of a pH imbalance. And this picture here on a maple, but chlorosis is common on pin oaks, sweet gum trees, maple, birches, things like that. And the best way to be aware of a pH problem in your soil is to get a soil test. And then they can give you recommendations on how to improve your soil. And another disease, another kind of interesting disease, is called aster yellows, which is one that I haven't personally seen a lot of, but it's common in the aster family, marigolds, asters, coneflowers, things like that. So the pictures here on this slide, at the bottom, you see a nice patch of purple coneflower that's got normal growth. And the top picture shows flowers infected with aster yellows. It causes this distorted flower shape. And so the disease is spread by insects like leafhoppers and things like that, but it's actually caused by a specific bacteria that the insects absorb when they feed on plants and then spread it from plant to plant. So the best recommendation if you find a plant with aster yellows is to just remove it and try to prevent the spread of that. And another common disease we see a lot of times is called powdery mildew. And so a lot of the earlier diseases really liked that wet environment like we talked about earlier, but powdery mildew prefers hot, humid days with no rain. And it can affect a wide variety of plants. Zinnia, phlox, aster, lilac seems to get it every year, but generally the damage is only aesthetic. So it's not a great cause for concern, especially on your large perennials like that. And so just like we talked about garden sanitation, we want to talk about maintaining tree vitality or just plant vitality in general. You want to water during dry periods lasting more than 2 weeks. It's really important to make sure that the plants don't experience drought conditions unless absolutely necessary. You want to lightly mulch the base of any trees or shrubs, again, to conserve water and keep that soil moisture high. And if you find any dead wood or diseased branches, you want to go ahead and prune those out whenever you see them. And again, just like with the vegetable garden, just take a look at your plants. Scout frequently for pests and diseases, and catching something early will definitely increase the likelihood of prevention. So there are some great resources here with University of Illinois Extension that we can provide to homeowners. The first is our Hort Answers website. It lists a lot of diseases, and you can search that database by plant type or by disease and get some treatment options there. And also a book we have in our office, Pest Management for the Home Landscape, is available, which provides pesticide recommendations for all sorts of insect and disease pests for vegetables as well as ornamentals. And again, the University of Illinois Plant Clinic is a great resource. You can check out their website or give them a call. And if you have any questions, here is my contact information. Feel free to contact me or anybody here at the University of Illinois Extension office, and we'd be happy to get you an answer to all of your plant questions. So thank you for listening.